Hey folks, with this video I'll be covering Lighten7's latest release. This is the Max X3A, and it features two firsts for this fledgling manufacturer. It's the first multi-emitter light that they have in their lineup, as well as the first light that uses XM-L2 emitters. So before I dive into the light itself, the packaging arrived in pretty much, standard generic cardboard box with a label that is specific to the light, covering the features as well. So now, just to go over that really quickly, it's supposed to output 1550 lumens on max for roughly just shy of an hour. Medium mode is 500 lumens at 3 hours, and low mode 150 lumens at 17 hours. The strobe is supposed to last at full max output for 1.5 hours. Normally they sell this as a kit, which includes the 26650 size battery, as well as a charger and a spacer, but given this is a review sample, I only got the instructions, a spare O-ring, and a lanyard. Now this lanyard does attach to the back of the light without requiring a mini steel ring as is common nowadays, so that lanyard attachment hole is big enough to fully accommodate the lobster claw. So jumping into the light itself, if you're familiar with shadow lights, you would immediately notice that this is just about identical to the SL3, and you would not be mistaken at all, because short of some design, grooves, cuts and whatnot, machined grooves, it is for all intents and purposes identical lights. As you can see, it also features 3 XM-L emitters, although in this case it's the first XM-L. These are U2s versus XM-L2s here. Now the switch is pretty much identical. The throat of the light, you got that flat and curved texture design there. The only places where it's really different is in the head, where this has featured circumferential grooves versus these milled grooves here. And as for the tail of the light, you got these machine patterns here versus these milled grooves here. The base of the light's pretty much the same. The SL3 does have that plug that I have previously mentioned in my previous review of the light, and there is no milled in hose for the lanyard attachment, as I just covered in the accessories part. That lobster claw goes right here versus something integral to the tail cap. Now, getting into the X3A itself, it does, like the SL3, have a stainless steel bezel that is removable. There is no AR coating that I could see there. And just to give you a close-up of those XM-L2 emitters, as mentioned, there's a trio of them in that triflector. Now, I did match, I think, the lumens claim, actually perhaps a bit higher on my PVC LMD, but I'll cover that in my full written review. Now, the side switch is one of the biggest differences. Sorry, I should actually say the UI. The side switch itself is pretty much the same, right? It's got an electronic side switch with no tail cap switch, so this governs everything. But the main difference is in the UI, which I'll get into a little bit later. Now, as with the SL3, it's pretty much just the head and the body itself, given that there is no tail cap. Now, these threads are not square cut, but overall, they thread on without too much issues. It did come decently greased, although for some strange reason my sample was missing the O-ring, but I found a spare one and I slapped that on. Now, the base of the light is almost identical to the SL3, with the exception that this nodule is actually raised a bit now, so you don't typically need a magnet. The reason why you see I have a magnet is because I guess through careless use, I had actually dented in that flat portion of my King Kong battery, so as you can see, it's been abused. The wrapper has come off a little bit slightly, but normally it doesn't require the use of a magnet, so that's specific to just my battery. But so that was a nice touch versus the SL3, that you no longer require that battery. The tube itself is, again, it's just a solid piece, milled. As you can see, there's just but a spring down there, and that's pretty much it. It's relatively straightforward in design. And given that the tail cap is nice and flat, it does allow for reasonably stable tail standing use. The kit version does come with this nifty 18650 sleeve that does have rubber O-rings so as to prevent or reduce the rattling in there, and does allow the use of 18650 size cells. Of course, what you should always use quality cells because the current draw is pretty high, as you can imagine, with a trio of XM-L2s, and I've measured as high as I believe 3.6 amps with the Ready Last 3400, and then 4 amps on a King Kong. Now, size and handling wise, I particularly like the 26650 form factor because I guess this tube it just feels right in the hand. It's a good, nice size that allows a good grip even though there's like minimal texturing on these lights, but either with an overhand grip you could still activate the size switch, I guess with your pinky or depending on how you held it with one of your digits, but with a underhand grip, you know, again, it just feels right. It's not overly large and it's not too slim, and like I said, it just feels like it gives you a nice solid grip. It's overall, compared to other 26650 size lights, it is a little stout, but the head, given it's a turbo head, it is a little bit larger than your standard size non-turbo head lights. The UI is where the greatest difference is versus the SL3, as I had previously mentioned. There is no longer a 2-second delay in order to turn on the light. Also, the pattern is from low, medium, high, versus previously where it was high, medium, low, and it will always turn on high. This one will always default to low. There is no memory. So a single click, and it'll come on immediately in low, cycle to medium, and cycle through high. Now to shut off the light, there still is that 2-second delay. And to access strobe, you could do it with the light off or on by double clicking. Now here's with the light on. However, one change with the UI that I do particularly like with the strobe function is that when you activate it, previously it would always cycle to the next level because of the 2 press. It interprets the first press as a cycle change and then the second press as the strobe activation. Then when you come out of strobe, it will actually default to that the next stage that you have previously set, right? So currently I'm in low, okay? With 2 presses, you'll notice that it'll change output level first to medium and then jump into strobe. But when I exit out of it, it defaults right back to low. You see, medium, high. That's a really nice touch. I particularly like that because, again, it remembers at least what was the last mode used. But again, once you switch out the battery, it's not going to memorize that level. So let's just say this is high. I unscrew it, screw it back on. It will always default to low. Now by comparison, here's what I meant about the SL3's strobe function. Currently I'm on medium, and if I activate strobe, it'll first go into low and then jump into strobe. But when I come out of it, it'll always default back to high. Now, I had previously not noticed any similarities between Lighten7's lights and Shadow's lights until Foy pointed it out when I reviewed the Max L2A. It was nearly identical to one of Shadow's lights. The reason why is because I had previously reviewed the M1A and M1B, and Shadow didn't really have any lights similar to that at all. So, but now with both the Lighten7 Elite S1A as well as this light, I do definitely notice that there is some similarities. However, though, fit and finish wise, I just feel like it's a step above. Perhaps it's the HA3 anodizing, or again, it just feels a little bit more refined, and this is kind of where I hope Shadow is progressing towards. I don't know, what is the connection between these two companies, but if one has control over the other, I really hope that, again, that Shadow would take Lighten7's lead on the fit and finish wise. So as you just heard while I was talking, that thread just goes on pretty nice and smooth without any issues at all. It's very silky. The finish, though, I did notice that the tube is slightly just off versus the head. It's almost got like it's probably not coming out on the camera, but to my eyes, it's got a very, very light greenish slash olive hue to it. So it's just slightly mismatched from the head itself, but overall absolutely no nicks or missing anodizing, none missing in these grooves here or within the crevices there, as well as around the edges here. Everything is fully deburred and nicely polished, so there are no sharp abrasions or whatnot. And given this form factor, again, there's no tail cap, right? It's just literally one solid piece tube and the head, both very robust pieces. So the weakest link probably would be here in the throat of the light, but given that those threads are recently long, I do feel that this can withstand some, decent abuse without breaking down. In terms of the laser engraving, there's really only two. There's the hot symbol on the head, but both it as well as the company name and model number are all very nice and sharp with absolutely no blotchiness at all. Now, one thing I had previously noticed on the SL3 as well as JM07 was on some of their side switch lights, the shadow lights, there was glue overrun around the switches, but as you can see here, there's none to be found on the X3A. Beam angle wise, despite the trio of XM-L2s, it still has a fairly tight center hotspot. I would say that's roughly about 20 degrees. I currently do have the shutter speed locked at 2,000th of a second and the aperture at f1.8. Now overall, the total with angle, I should say, is roughly, there's a greater spill out here that you can't really capture, so I'm going to bump this up actually, so you can actually see the beam width. Alright, so I would say that that's roughly about maybe even 90 to 100-ish degrees total width, so it does also have a fairly decent flood as well. In terms of the beam profile, initially you may see sort of like a floral pattern, due to that triflector, but this is with the light extremely up close to the object. Right now I'm probably about 3-4 inches away, and it does eventually melt out. I would say roughly about 8 inches to a feet out. You can no longer see that floral pattern, or at least it's not as distinct. Instead, it just has this nice, I wouldn't quite call it a circular flood, but out here, you probably can't see it on the camera right now, but the center hotspot is tighter to here, and there is a nice transition out here to a flood. So let me actually just bump this in output so you can see this is currently on low, and you are probably detecting a flicker, I guess PWM. This is on medium, so you can kind of get an idea of the beam profile now. And this is on max. So here's the floral pattern I alluded to earlier that's cast by the triflector, but again, once you get a decent distance away from whatever object you are illuminating, you shouldn't really see that. As an initial conclusion, I find that the X3A is another solid release from Lighten7. Hopefully they will find a dealer over in the United States soon, so that way some of you guys could get a hold of their products stateside. So if anybody knows of any dealers interested, or if you're a dealer and you're watching this, by all means please reach out to them. So, but again, as far as the light itself, another quality product, fairly solid. The UI change, I guess, I don't know, it's definitely a very subjective thing. Some people may not like the fact that, on a high power light like this, you're defaulting to low, but I suppose it has its merits in the sense that, you don't absolutely destroy your night adapted eyes. But when you do think about it in terms of, let's just say, what is the reason I would get a compact 1600 lumens light? I guess you would kind of use it for SAR use, search and rescue use, right? And in that case, perhaps you would prefer to have the light come on and high. But I do feel it's a nice touch that, you don't have that 2-second delay anymore in the UI. However, of course, there's the cons that the light can be accidentally activated relatively easily with but a single push, right? So in that case, whenever you're not using light, just simply lock it out with a 1/8 or 1/4 of a turn there. As previously mentioned, the fit and finish overall is quite good, although I would have preferred to seen some AR coating here. I figured that would probably give it a few extra lumens in addition to those offered by those XM-L2s, which gave it a nice bump over the SL3. Also, in terms of the runtime, I did notice it is slightly more efficient, meaning I got a little bit longer runtime versus the SL3. This is perhaps the most solid comparison I can make between the XM-L2 versus the XM-L emitters, in that I could personally witness now that, again, there is a slight bump in output as well as a slight bump in efficiency as well. In a way, this kind of is like what the SL3 V2 should be, aside from the UI, because like I said, the UI is subjective. Personally, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to decide whether or not I prefer this versus the SL3. I guess, again, from the one hand, it's nice to have it, come on and low, so I can bump it up easily enough to high. But on the other hand, it would have been nice to have high turn on immediately. However, the 2-second delay on the SL3 at turn on kind of defeats the purpose of having high immediately, because you figure, hey, if I need high, I need it immediately, but you gotta wait 2 seconds for it. Whereas with this, with actually 3 quick depresses, you're kind of there. So that took it roughly about 2 seconds as well. Now, I didn't do that too fast because one of the main things about both of these lights is that strobe can be accidentally activated a little too easily, because the timing that it takes to activate it is a little bit too short, right? So I would like to have seen, sorry, too long. I would like to have seen them tighten up so that it really would require 2 fairly quick depresses in order to activate the strobe. However, in summary though, again, another nice solid release, and also this definitely further proliferates both the XM-L2, the multi-emitters, as well as the 26650 sized lights, so we should definitely be seeing a lot more of these type of lights in the future. And that wraps up this review. As part of FTC disclosures, the X3A was provided by Lighten7 for review. Thanks again for watching.